Welcome boys and girls, Christine here with a discussion about Omens of Destruction, 4th World War Warhammer 3, Immortal Empires, and whether or not it failed as a DLC from Creative Assembly's perspective. It did not meet sales expectations. And that's the reason, at least according to certain people on Reddit and in other places, that might be the reason that Creative Assembly has allocated fewer resources for Warhammer 3 going forward. So we're going to get less DLCs than we might have gotten. We're not going to necessarily get the kind of patches we would have wanted or even the ones they promised. If you look at the recent video on the subject of the Sinnelleos DLC, it was one of the points they made there is like, oh, we didn't expect the Kislev rework to be as complicated as it ended up being, so we're not going to do something like that again. Or more or less, that's what they said, or at least for the next few patches. What happens after that, especially after Sinnelleos DLC comes out, that's up in there. I think it depends on how well the Sinnelleos DLC does do. Here's my perspective on this. We know that in 2024, Creative Assembly decided to release Pharaoh Dynasties and then move the CA Sophia team to work on Warhammer 3. So Omens of Destruction, Sinnelleos DLC, and so on, and various patches. Meanwhile, the rest of Creative Assembly is working on the next whole wargame. So with Thrones of Decay, you basically had an all-hands-on-deck type situation, because Thrones of Decay was really the make-or-break moment. If Thrones of Decay did poorly, Creative Assembly might as well have been shut down. Because you can imagine that Sega was not especially happy about what had happened with Hyenas, which has a change, and with the initial release of Pharaoh. Thrones of Decay likely proved to Sega, and that probably was the real audience of Thrones of Decay, not the player base, but Sega, to prove to them that there was significant value in Creative Assembly still. Now, Thrones of Decay came out, you saw a huge player spike, and you did see success. And after that, Creative Assembly had a decision to make. Whether or not they were going to pour resources into things like Pharaoh Dynasties, resources in Warhammer 3, or throw as many resources as they could while continuing to support Warhammer 3, but pour all their resources into the next Total War game and just continue supporting Warhammer 3 until that comes out. I think that's the decision they've made. Whether or not it's the best decision, that's a topic of discussion. But it does seem pretty clear to me that that is the path they've chosen to go down on. Again, whether or not it's the best decision or not, I think there is a limit to how many people would be willing to jump into Warhammer 3 at this point, regardless of how many resources they were willing to put into it. And it's also old. There's a lot of technical issues. The code, calling it spaghetti code would be very generous, apparently, from what I've been able to tell. So those are obvious problems. Just having a fresh start, a new game that doesn't have all these issues, that you have code that's all, you have an engine and a game that we're not just looking at the release of Warhammer 3, we're looking at the release of Warhammer 1. There's a lot of problems that come with that. Like, performance-wise, for instance, Pharaoh Dynasties runs better than Warhammer 3, flat out runs better than Warhammer 3. Then turn timers, the campaign performance, the battle performance, it's a lot of things are just flat out better in Pharaoh Dynasties or even Troy than how Warhammer 3 handles. And it's not just down to the scale of the map. It's like there's a lot of engine issues and limitations that are happening because, yeah, they're using old code. It's not necessarily as well optimized as it could be. So there's arguments made in favor of that. Regardless, if Omens of Destruction did not meet expectations, because it may very well have not met expectations. I think they made the decision before Omens of Destruction. Maybe Omens of Destruction underperformed, or maybe it did perform to their expectations, but it didn't overperform those expectations. So maybe they expected a certain number of sales and it didn't go over that, and that just solidified their choice. I also think that if the rumors are true about the next game being a 40k game, given the media attention that is on 40k at the moment, and the significant success of Space Marine 2, for instance, that may have just solidified Creative Assembly's choice. Regardless of all of that, with respect to Omens of Destruction, I do think it does certainly have problems as a DLC that did not necessarily lend themselves towards achieving success for this DLC. So let's take a look at campaigns, or let's look at the races of the DLC and how the DLC was handled. Like, marketing-wise, a long wait period, and the marketing was not especially great for Omens of Destruction, but worth saying that. But in terms of the DLC itself, let's consider Skulltaker. Skulltaker is actually the least interesting campaign for Khorne. Like, the Khorne rework, the Regiment's Renown, new units, all well and great. But if you want people to buy a DLC, you gotta give them a really good campaign. And even with the new units and all that, like, the legendary heroes are great, though in many Khorne campaigns, you might finish that campaign long before you've unlocked them. The new lore choice is good, the Skull Reapers, Wrathmongers, etc., they're good, but they're not so phenomenal as units that you would buy the DLC just for them. I think you'd rather buy the DLC if you're buying for units, or for any kind of unit, you're buying it for the Regents right now. The problem is that means the campaign you're offering as part of the DLC has to be really good. And that's not the case with Skulltaker's campaign. The problem with Skulltaker's campaign is that he starts in Lustria. Lustria is a really bad zone for Khorne in particular. Lustria in general is really bad from a terrain perspective. But Khorne, who's focusing on fighting battles constantly, raising settlements to the ground, is a really bad spot when Lustria, because you move slower in Lustria, and because of the natural choke points of settlements, in particular in Lustria, that you can't move through if you raise them, then Khorne ends up being screwed over by Lustria quite a bit. I mean, you can still beat the campaign, that's not the problem, and you'll still be very strong, but it creates this kind of grindy situation in a Lustrian campaign. Now you might say, well, Skulltaker has teleportation. Yeah, 10 turn cooldown teleportation that a single cultist of Khorne can do better, because you set up a cult of Khorne, he can teleport your faction leader to a settlement. So the whole point of Skulltaker's campaign is kind of nullified. Like, oh, you go out, beat up challengers, and you collect their essence, their champion's essence, and you get things like teleportation and significant campaign upgrades. It doesn't feel very great because, not just because of Lustria, not just because of how it slows you down, but also when you look at this Cloak of Skulls, there's a lot of grinding of essences to unlock these kind of things, and it ends up being just tedious. And it doesn't match Khorne's campaign pace, to be clear. Like, you need hundreds, thousands even. Well, not quite thousands, but you need quite a few of these champions' essences to unlock these abilities. And quite a few of these things do end up feeling fluff, because you have a really powerful army. Oh, let's make it stronger. It's like, okay, I'm already very strong as Khorne. Giving me more strength does not necessarily make a campaign better. And again, you have this weird pace. Like, you have things that can really speed your campaign up. And then, and some things you can do very fast, and then some things you do very slow. Partly Lustria, paltry, in part because of the essence situation, the essence grind, etc. I mean, people realize that leaving legendary lords alive in a campaign so you could farm their essence, it feels like we're playing a Warhammer version of the Haka. Collecting essence, it's all about the essence, is not really a great campaign dynamic. What's even worse is that, from a paid DLC perspective specifically, what's even worse really with Skulltaker is you do have a campaign that plays how he should play, like very fast, very dynamic, going around the world, beating people up that present a worthy challenge. Not just some random schmuck in the jungle of Lustria, but a worthy challenger. Sure, you can teleport later on in a campaign, you can gain vision and use Skulltaker's teleportation if you send heroes, or if you do his quest battle, then you might get some vision with certain factions, and then you can use his teleport to get the fuck out of Lustria. I mean, whenever you have to leave at your starting location, that's not really a great campaign dynamic to talk about. So, but you do have the contrast between Skulltaker and Arbol. Like, Arbol is going around the world, he is beating people up, and guess what? You don't need the DLC for Khorne in order to have a good time with Arbol. And if you do want the DLC for Arbol, it ain't this one. It's actually Champions of Chaos. So they released a DLC that pretty much felt redundant, because at the same time they released a great rework, they released a great free Legendary Lord that had a much better campaign, a much more fun campaign, and a campaign that fit Khorne substantially better. Also, I think they, in terms of the rework, they handled one thing poorly, and that is the way they decided to split off mortal and demonic elements and the limitations on units. Because basically, when you're playing Arbol, you start with the mortal element, you can start pumping out mortal units, which are just flat out better than demonic units in a campaign situation. The demon reforging system didn't end up being as good as they probably thought about it. So you ended up with those kind of problems in a campaign. Like, yeah, you might recruit a lot of Bloodletters in Skulltaker's campaign, and then guess what? You just want to get rid of those Bloodletters and go with Chaos Warriors. And Chaos Warriors Khorne with Halberds, which are very, very easy to unlock in a campaign. I mean, it is a problem in Scarbrand's campaign, but the fact that the first thing you want to do in both a Skulltaker and Scarbrand campaign is literally convert your initial element to mortal from demonic is not really a sign of a successful campaign design. Basically, what I'm saying is Skulltaker's campaign is not especially appealing for a lot of people, whereas Arbol's is. Maybe Arbol should have been the paid legendary lord than Skulltaker, the free one. I think that might have worked better in quite a few ways in terms of getting people to buy this DLC. Because Arbol's campaign, again, phenomenal, well done. And hell, if Skulltaker had those dynamic objectives that teleportation that Arbol had, and Arbol had a more limited system or a slower system, I think that would actually have worked quite well in terms of making Skulltaker's campaign actually much better, regardless of the jungle, because you're just like, okay, I can hop out of here in 2 turns. Screw this place. Let me go beat up some actual people instead of fighting freaking lizardmen. This is a clear-cut example of how putting a good legendary lord, because Skulltaker is a good legendary lord, but placing a good legendary lord in a bad position can genuinely ruin their campaigns, and I think, yeah, Lustria just plainly sucks, and as a result of it, Skulltaker's campaign is not as good as it could be. And certainly not as good as Arbol's campaign. To talk about the greenskin situation of Omens of Destruction, I think the greenskin rework had some good elements, some bad elements. Quite a few people didn't like it for a number of reasons. First off, because greenskins were certainly nerfed as part of Omens of Destruction in certain ways. So you couldn't do the same kind of bullshit that you could before. I do personally think that ended up working out for the best compared to where things had been before, but to be sure, there are issues with it. Like, for instance, only being able to increase shaman capacity at tier 4 is a bit irritating because shamans are fun to use and all that. Still, the greenskin rework, it has its issues, it has its benefits. I do especially like the fact that they gave us access to things like Biggins at tier 2. I like the fact that pushing down the orc path is far more viable. I do appreciate the addition of the Savage Orc Shaman, as well as various other changes. However, it felt incomplete to a certain extent, but the real problem with Omens of Destruction from a paid perspective is Gorbad's campaign in itself. So, Gorbad himself is a great legendary lord. He's got a great skill line, he's got a cool character design, all that, but you know, you can always play Skarsnik and Confederate him, you're pretty close enough to him. And Skarsnik has flat-out better faction effects in his campaign, and he can get stock stance on every single one of his army if you get Caracade Peaks, which is not especially hard to do. Now, Gorbad does have a lot of power, that's not the problem, they're all pretty powerful. But the issue is how his campaign plays out. So from a starting position, it's a good starting position. Skulltaker wishes he had this kind of starting position, actually. It would have vastly improved his campaign. But faction effect-wise, the only thing that's really worth talking about here is the global recruitment duration of -1 turn. Because raising settlements is something you don't want to do as greenskins. Yeah, you can get more scrap, but you want money more than scrap for a lot of your campaign. Scrap can be useful much later on, but given the way greenskins play out in a campaign, by the time that actually matters, you will have long since won your campaign. Extra rewards from WAS, considering the duration of WAS, how long it takes to get those rewards, and just having a bit of an extra benefit, and certainly not a substantial one, is not great. And then there's the plan. The plan just sucks. Like, oh, you press a button, you get an effect if you have a certain number of units, or you've met the condition to unlock that benefit. But then you need to continue maintaining that condition in order to keep that benefit. That is not a good campaign mechanic in any way, shape, or form. I guess they never learned the lesson of Astankia. See, people hated Astankia and still do hate Astankia. Not just because of her starting position, which, yes, it has been improved with the Kiev rework, but rather, the one thing that's really annoying about Astankia is it's freaking tedious to every turn or every couple of turns go into a menu, click a bunch of buttons to get an effect. It's actually kind of worse than Gorbad's situation because every single individual army he has to maintain a certain number of units or heroes or anything like that in order to get some of these effects and crucially maintain them. And also, you can only get access to the plan by fighting battles with Gorbad's army. It is not a great system. It's complete fluff, especially given the pacing of Greenskin campaigns. So Greenskins have very fast-paced campaigns. Maybe that is, by the way, a problem of Omens of Destruction. All the campaigns, all the races affected by Omens of Destruction are very fast-paced races. They don't necessarily have the systems, all of them, for that kind of pacing. So Skulltaker doesn't have it, Gorbad doesn't have it, Maneater does, but maybe that's something that's off-putting for people because, yes, there are plenty of people who do prefer a slower pace. Now, I personally think a faster pace is the way to go, and I think that Creative Assembly should devote more resources and effort into making a faster paced campaign work better, especially since we don't have a proper endgame in Warhammer 3. But it can be off-putting for people if, you're just making races highly aggressive, hyperactive races on the campaign. Now, maybe that's off-putting with Omens of Destruction, but yeah. With Greenskins, the rework is great, Skarsnik is good, Warzag is good, but Gorbad's unique campaign mechanic is not great. In fact, I've enjoyed Gorbad's campaign most when I just flat out ignore the plan. Like, it can be a fun campaign, but Skarsnik is just a better Legendary Lord in that case, from a lot of perspectives. Finally, we have the Ogres. Now, from my perspective, Ogres are, objectively speaking, the best part of this DLC. Both the free reworks, so you get a significant rework for Ogres, which makes them much better. You get significant improvements for both Greasus and Scrag, and you get a good campaign with Maneater. But here's the problem. Well, first off, we gotta mention that it is a bit of an issue when you're trying to sell a DLC and content creators are afraid to even mention the name of one of the main characters of that DLC, and that's Maneater's name. That's the reason I'm not showing him on screen. I'm not sure how much it mattered, but I think Ogres just don't have the popularity of other races. Like, you look at Friends of the Gate, you get Empire, you get Dwarves, you get the Gotrek and Felix campaign personified. That is an amazing experience. Maneater just doesn't cut it in the same way. Skulltaker suffers because of his position, Gorbad because of his unique campaign mechanics, so the Ogres are supposed to do the heavy lifting in this, and maybe they're just not capable of doing so. Like, there's no complaint with regards to the quality of the content. The units are fun, the regiments renown are fun, the lords are fun. Like, the vast improvements to Greasus and Scrag, the way camps work, research tree, etc. A lot of really good changes over here. Nothing really to complain about. But as part of an overall package, it's probably just not enough. Like, with Omens of Destruction, again, comparison to Friends Decay. Like, Empire is very popular. Even if Elspeth is not the most popular, like Carl is very popular, but it is the Empire. With the Dwarves, you have Malachi and Dwarves being popular, and Tamarkan just being an amazing character. That sells. With the decisions they made for Omens of Destruction in terms of the characters they decided to focus on, and how they decided to focus on them, and some of the decisions they made, it may not have worked as well as they would have wanted to. And that's assuming, of course, that Omens of Destruction did not meet their expectations, which may or may not be the case. I guess we'll find out. History will tell, if it ever does tell us. But it could just very well be the case that Creative Assembly decided in advance that they're not going to focus as much with Omens of Destruction as they did with TOD, because they want to focus on the next Total War game. That's my view on all of this. Costin signing out.